The gentle sway of the train car had always been soothing to me. As a regional sales manager for a large pharmaceutical company, I spent more time on the railway than I did in my own bed. The rhythmic clack of the wheels on the tracks was my lullaby, the ever-changing landscape outside my window, a constant companion. This particular Tuesday evening found me on yet another overnight train, heading from Chicago to New York for a critical meeting. I settled into my usual routine, laptop out, spreadsheet open, cup of mediocre coffee cooling on the fold-down tray. The first sign that something was amiss came about 3 hours into the journey. I glanced at my watch, frowning slightly. We should have reached Cleveland by now, but the cityscape outside remained stubbornly rural. Fields and forests rolled by, bathed in the eerie glow of a full moon. I flagged down a passing attendant, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a pinched expression. "Excuse me, but shouldn't we have reached Cleveland by now?" She gave me a strange look, her eyes slightly unfocused. "Cleveland? I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not familiar with that stop. Perhaps you're thinking of a different route." Before I could respond, she hurried away, disappearing into the next car. I sat back, puzzled. How could she not know Cleveland? It was a major stop on this line. I shook my head, chalking it up to a new employee, and returned to my work. As the hours ticked by, my unease grew. The landscape outside never changed, an endless loop of moonlit fields and shadowy forests. My phone had lost signal a long time ago, and my watch seemed to be malfunctioning, its hands spinning wildly before stopping altogether. I decided to stretch my legs, hoping a walk through the train might clear my head. As I made my way through the cars, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. The few passengers I saw sat motionless in their seats, staring blankly ahead or out the window. In the dining car, I found an elderly man hunched over a cup of coffee. His wrinkled hands trembled slightly as he lifted the mug to his lips. "Excuse me," I said, sliding into the seat beside him. "I don't mean to bother you, but have you noticed anything strange about this journey?" The old man's rheumy eyes focused on me, a flicker of recognition passing across his face. "You're new here, aren't you?" he said, his voice a dry whisper. "First time on this line." I nodded, a chill running down my spine. "What do you mean, this line? This is just the regular Chicago to New York route, isn't it?" He let out a wheezing laugh that turned into a cough. "Oh, my boy, this ain't no regular route. This here's the last line. Ain't no New York we're heading for." "I don't understand," I said, my heart beginning to race. "Where are we going, then?" The old man leaned in closer, the smell of stale coffee on his breath. "Nowhere," he whispered. "Everywhere. This train don't stop, son. It just keeps on going, round and round. A world without end." I jerked back, convinced I was dealing with a madman. "That's impossible. Every train has to stop eventually." He just smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "You go on believing that if it makes you feel better, but mark my words, you'll see. We all figure it out, sooner or later." I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my chair. "You're crazy. This is just a normal train. We'll be in New York by morning." As I turned to go, the old man called out, "What's your name, son?" I hesitated for a moment. Jack Thurston." "Well, Jack Thurston, I'm Howard. I'll be seeing you around. We got all the time in the world, after all." I hurried back to my seat, Howard's words echoing in my mind. It was nonsense, of course. Trains don't go on forever. There had to be a rational explanation for the delay and the strange behavior of the staff. As I sank into my seat, I noticed a young woman across the aisle, furiously scribbling in a notebook. Her long dark hair fell in a curtain around her face, and her legs bounced with nervous energy. "Excuse me," I said, leaning towards her. I don't suppose you know when we're due to arrive in New York, do you? She looked up, her eyes wide and slightly manic. New York? She repeated, letting out a hysterical little giggle. Oh, honey, there is no New York, not anymore. There's only the train. I felt my blood run cold. What are you talking about? She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. I've been on this train for I don't know how long. Days, weeks, it all blurs together. But I've figured it out. We're not going anywhere. We're stuck in a loop, a never-ending journey to nowhere. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. That's impossible. You're just confused. Maybe you fell asleep and missed your stop. She laughed again, a sound devoid of humor. Oh, I wish it were that simple. But look around you. Have you seen anyone get off? Have we stopped at any stations? This isn't a normal train, Jack. This is something else entirely. I started at the sound of my name. How do you know my name? She smiled, a sad, knowing expression. I heard you talking to old Howard in the dining car. I'm Lisa, by the way. Welcome aboard the Eternal Express. I stood up abruptly, my head spinning. This is crazy. All of you are insane. I'm going to go find the conductor and get some answers. As I stormed off towards the front of the train, I heard Lisa call out behind me. Good luck. Don't say I didn't warn you. I made my way through the cars, each one identical to the last. The same faded blue seats, the same flickering overhead lights, the same black-faced passengers staring into nothingness. How long had I been walking? Felt like hours, but that was impossible in a train of normal length. Finally, I reached what should have been the engine car. Instead of a locomotive, I found myself in another passenger car, exactly like all the others. I spun around, disoriented. How could this be? A hand on my shoulder made me jump. I turned to find the attendant from earlier, her pinched face now twisted into an unnaturally wide smile. Can I help you, sir? She asked, her voice sickly sweet. I need to speak with a conductor, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. There's been some kind of mistake. This train should have reached New York by now. She smiled, and it never wavered. I'm sorry, sir, but there's no conductor. There's no mistake either. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. I backed away from her, my heart pounding. What is this place? What's happening? She tilted her head, her eyes suddenly black and empty. This is the last line, Mr. Thurston. The train that never stops, never ends. You bought a ticket, and now you're on the ride of eternity. I turned and ran, pushed past confused passengers, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. I burst into the space between cars, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. The door to the next car was just a few feet away. If I could reach it, maybe I could find a way out of this nightmare train. But as I stepped forward, the gap between the cars began to stretch. The next door moved further and further away, no matter how far I ran. The wind howled around me, drowning out my screams of infuriation and fear. Suddenly a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back into the car. I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. Lisa stood over me, her face pale in the flickering light. Are you crazy? She hissed. You can't go out there. Between the cars, that's where it gets you. Where what gets you? I asked, my voice shaking. She helped me to my feet, glancing nervously at the door. The thing that runs the train. The thing that brought us all here. Trust me, you don't want to meet it. As if on cue, a low rumbling sound echoed through the car. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Part machine, part animal. All wrong. The lights flickered more intently. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw something massive moving in the shadow between the cars. Lisa pulled me back to my seat, her grip on my arm almost painful. Listen to me, she said urgently. I know this is hard to accept. God knows I fought against it for I don't even know how long. But fighting only makes it worse. You have to accept where you are, or you'll go mad. I slumped in my seat, my mind reeling. But why? Why is this happening? What is this place? She shook her head. I don't know. None of us do. All we know is that we're here on this never-ending journey. Some think it's hell, others purgatory. Old Howard thinks it's some kind of cosmic mistake. Me, I think it's just the universe's way of saying, tough luck, kiddo. I looked out the window, watching the same moonlit landscape roll by. How many times had I seen those same fields, those same trees? How long would I continue to see them? So what do we do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lisa gave me a sad smile. We ride. We talk. We try to stay sane. We hope that maybe, just maybe, one day we'll reach the last stop. As the train rolled on into the endless night, I realized with a sinking heart that my journey had only just begun. The destination, that remained a terrifying mystery. Days blended into nights and nights into days. The monotonous rhythm of the train became the backdrop to my existence. I lost count of how many times I'd watched the same scenery roll by. How many times I'd walked the length of the train, hoping to find something, anything different. Lisa became my anchor in this sea of madness. She spent hours talking, sharing stories of our lives before the train. She had been a journalist, always chasing the next big story. Guess I found it, she would say with a bitter laugh, gesturing at our surroundings. Old Howard joined us often, his weathered face a map of time he'd spent on this hellish journey. Been riding this train for longer than I can remember, he'd say, his rheumy old eyes distant. Seen folks come and go. Some just disappear. Others, well, he'd trail off, shaking his head. I learned to fear the space between the cars. Sometimes, late at night, when the train's rhythm seemed to falter, we'd hear things, scraping, slithering sounds. Once I caught a glimpse of something massive and dark undulating past the windows. Lisa pulled me away before I could get a good look. Trust me, you don't want to know. The other passengers were a mix of resigned and the mad. Like us, they tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Others had given in to despair, sitting in the same spot day after day, staring blankly at nothing. Then there were those who'd lost their minds entirely, prowling the cars with wild eyes and incoherent ramblings. One such soul was called Preacher, tall and menacing with a tangled beard and eyes that burned with fanatical fervor. He would roam the train, shouting about sins and redemption. We're all here for a reason, he'd bellow, spittle flying from his lips. This is our punishment, our penance, I say penance. Repent, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find your way off this damn train. Most ignored him, but some listened. I watched as he gathered a small following, passengers desperate for any explanation, any hope of escape. It was on what I guessed to be my 100th day on the train that things took a darker turn. It was jolted awake by screams coming from the front of the car. Lisa was already on her feet, her face a mask of terror. "They've done it," she whispered. "They've actually done it." I followed her gaze to see a group of the preacher's followers dragging a struggling passenger towards the door between the cars. The preacher stood by, his arms raised, chanting something I couldn't make out over the victim's screams. "What are you doing?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "A sacrifice," old Howard said, his voice grim. "Fools think they can appease whatever's running the train, buy their way off with blood." I started to move towards them, but Lisa held me back. "Don't. There's nothing we can do. Just don't watch." But I couldn't look away. The group reached the door, and with a final triumphant cry from the preacher, they shoved their victim out into the space between cars. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came a sound, a wet, tearing sound that would haunt my nightmares for days to come. The door slammed shut, cutting off the screams. The preacher turned his face to the rest of us, his eyes wide with excitement. "It's done. The unworthy has been cast out. Soon we shall reach our final destination." But the train rolled on, unchanged. Hours passed, then days. No final stop, no salvation. Just the endless journey and the growing madness of the preacher and his flock. More sacrifices followed. The train's population dwindled as passenger after passenger was thrown to whatever lurked below the cars. Those of us who refused to join the preacher's cult banded together, watching each other's backs, sleeping in shifts. It was during one of my watch shifts that I first saw her. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8, wandering alone through the car. Her pink dress was pristine, her blonde hair neatly braided. She looked so out of place in this nightmare that for a moment I thought she was a hallucination. "Hello," I said softly, not wanting to scare her. "Are you lost?" She turned to me, and I had to stifle a gasp. Her eyes were completely black, like empty voids in her small face. When she spoke, her voice was old, ancient even. "Lost," she repeated. "No, I don't think so. I know exactly where I am. Do you?" "What are you?" I whispered. I felt a chill run down my spine. She smiled, revealing teeth that were just a little bit too sharp. "I'm a passenger like you. We're all passengers here, Jack. All of us, riding the rails to eternity." "How do you know my name?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "I know everyone's name," she said, her black eyes boring into mine. "I know why you're here. I know their sins, their fears, their deepest, darkest secrets. Would you like to know yours, Jack?" I backed away, my heart pounding. "Stay away from me," I said, my voice shaking. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Jack, you can't run from me. You can't run from any of this. You bought your ticket. Now you have to ride." I blinked and she was gone. Just vanished, as if she'd never been there at all. I slumped in my seat, my mind reeling. Was I lost? Had I finally snapped, like so many others in this godforsaken train? I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, Lisa was shaking me awake. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Jack, something happened. The train, it's slowing down." I sat up, suddenly alert. She was right. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could feel the train deaccelerating. The familiar clack of wheels on tracks was slowing, becoming more distinct. Passengers were stirring, looking around in confusion and hope. Even the preacher and his followers had stopped their mad ranting, staring out the windows with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Are we stopping?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. Old Howard shook his head, his expression grim. "Don't get your hopes up, son. In all my time here, I've never known this train to stop. Whatever's happening, it ain't gonna be good." As if to punctuate his words, the lights in the car began to flicker more intensely than I'd ever seen them. The temperature dropped rapidly, our breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. Then, with a great screeching of metal on metal, the train ground to a halt. For a moment, there was absolute silence. We all held our breath, waiting, hoping, fearing. Then with a hiss of hydraulics, the doors slid open. "Finally," the preacher cried, pushing his way towards the exit. "Our salvation is at hand. Come, brothers and sisters, let us—" His words were cut off by a scream of pure terror. As he stepped off the train, something grabbed him, something huge and dark and impossible. In the blink of an eye, he was gone, leaving nothing behind but a spreading pool of blood on the platform. Chaos erupted. Passengers pushed and shoved, some trying to get off the train, others desperately attempting to close the doors. I lost sight of Lisa in the pandemonium. And through it all, I heard laughter, the same glass-like sound from beyond. I turned to see the little girl with the black eyes, standing calmly in the middle of the mayhem. "Welcome to the last stop, Jack," she said, her voice cutting through the screams and cries. "Are you ready to get off?" As I stared into those bottomless black pits, I realized, with dawning horror, that our endless journey had only just begun. The real nightmare was only starting. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of a train whistle, signaling the departure to our next unknown destination. The chaos around me faded into a dull roar, and I stared into the little girl's black eyes. Time seemed to slow. In that moment, I had a sudden, crystal-clear realization. This was a test. The endless train ride, the maddening repetition, the horror I'd witnessed. It had all been leading to this moment of choice. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "No, I'm not getting off. Not here. Not like this." The little girl's smile faltered for a split second, a crack in her otherworldly composure. "You don't have a choice, Jack. Everyone has to get off eventually." I stood my ground, even as I heard more screams from the platform, more passengers being dragged into the darkness. There's always a choice. Told me I bought a ticket to ride. Well, I'm not ready for it to end. Her eyes narrowed. "Can't stay on the train forever, Jack. Doesn't work like that." "Watch me," I growled, turning away from her and pushing through the panicked crowd. I had to find Lisa. I had to find Howard. We'd survived this long together. I wasn't about to leave them behind. I spotted Howard first, huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with terror. "Come on, we need to move," I said, grabbing his arm. "Where? There's nowhere to go. It's got us. It's finally got us." I shook him, perhaps more roughly than I intended. "Listen to me. This isn't the end. It's only just another part of the journey. We have to stick together. We need to find Lisa." Something in my voice must have reached him, because he nodded and stumbled to his feet. We pushed through the crowd, searching desperately for Lisa's familiar face. We found her near the front of the car, trying to pull other passengers back from the door. "Lisa, we have to go," I called out. She turned, relief flooding her face when she saw me. "Go where? In case you haven't noticed, we're a little short on options here." I pointed towards the back of the train. "We keep going. This thing has to end somewhere, and I don't think it's here." As if in response to my words, I heard the train whistle again, louder this time. The engine was starting up. "It's leaving. We have to get off now," Howard said, his eyes wide. "Or we'll be trapped forever," I finished for him. "I got news for you, Howard. We're already trapped. Have been since we first stepped on board. But now we've got a chance to find the real way out. Lisa looked at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. You think this is all part of it, don't you? The final test. It has to be, and I'm not failing it by giving in now. The train lurched, beginning to move. Around us, the last of the passengers were either fleeing onto the platform or collapsing in despair. It's now or never, I said. Are you with me? Lisa grabbed my hand without hesitation. Howard hesitated for a moment, looking longingly at the door, but then took Lisa's other hand. Right. Let's see where this crazy train takes us. As the train picked up speed, we made our way towards the back, pushing against the tide of terrified passengers. The little girl appeared again, her face contorted with rage. You can't do this. You have to get off. Everyone gets off. Not today, I told her, pushing past. We reached the final car, just as the platform disappeared from view. Through the windows, we could see only darkness, not the familiar darkness of night, but an absolute void, empty of all light and substance. The train picked up speed, rattling and shaking more violently than ever before. We huddled together, bracing ourselves against the walls of the car. What now? Lisa yelled. We wait, and we don't let go. The darkness outside seemed to press in on us, seeping through the windows like a living thing. The lights in the car flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. I could feel Lisa's hand in mine, Howard's presence at my side, but I couldn't see them. Then, just as suddenly as it had began, the shaking stopped. The oppressive darkness lifted, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, and the train began to slow. Sunlight, real, warm, beautiful sunlight, streamed through the windows. I blinked my eyes, unused to the brightness after so long in the train's artificial light. As my vision cleared, I saw that we were pulling into a station, a real station, with people waiting on the platform, going about their daily lives as if nothing was amiss. The train came to a gentle stop. The doors opened with a familiar hiss. For a moment, none of us moved, afraid that this was just another trick, another test. Then Howard let out a whoop of joy and rushed for the door. Lisa and I followed, stepping out onto the platform with shaky legs. The station read, Grand Central Station. We'd made it. We were in New York. As we stood there, breathless and disbelieving, I felt a tug on my sleeve. I turned to see the little girl with the black eyes, but now in the sunlight she looked different, normal, just like a regular kid with brown eyes and a confused expression. Excuse me, is this the train to Chicago? I knelt down to her level, smiling. No, sweetheart, this train just came from Chicago, but trust me, you don't want to get on it. She nodded, thanking me, and ran off to find her parents. I watched her go, a weight lifting from my chest. Lisa squeezed my hand. Is it really over? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her, then at Howard, then at the bustling station around us. Yeah, I think it is, I said, finally allowing myself to believe. As we made our way out of the station and into the bright New York morning, I knew that the memories of our endless journey would stay with us forever. But we had faced the darkness, made our choices, and found our way back to the light. And if I ever saw a train again, it'd be too soon. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our spooky skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our ghostly writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.